Um, no, but I want to share with you, I'm very glad to be here because it is a topic that we kind of spend most of our time with. So we are change architects, so we are dealing with change, and our name includes synergy and integrity. So our hypothesis is that there cannot be the synergy that you would expect from an organization unless there is integrity. And so I want to share with you how we struggle with that and the approach we basically take. And then I want to illustrate that approach using recent developments internationally and locally in terms of in the governance sphere and how that is linked to culture and how that is linked to the work of the board and what are some practical things that the boards of companies who are accountable for the culture and the ethics of the organization, what they can practically do, and maybe along the way also share with you some of the feedback and some of the issues that they're facing in reality as well. So as part of the cutting, the next slide wasn't supposed to be there. So this is our approach to change, or to change and to integrity. So what our hypothesis is that you cannot create any change if you look only at systems alone, or if you look only at persons alone, if you look only at individuals or only at the group. But any intervention, for it to be successful, you have to look at all 4 dimensions. Now, where you start depends a little bit. Sometimes a client comes and says, oh, we want to do our governance system, we want to do an ethics system, we want to do a strategy, whatever. So that the entry could be in different places, but then from that, we immediately have to be working with the values and the intentions of the leaders, and also the intentions and the values of the culture that is within the organization. I'll speak a little bit more about that. But we're all familiar with what the definitions of culture is. And then we look at the processes and the systems. And it is only if the 4 dimensions go together that you can have a small chance of success. It's not probable, but it's a good start. Now to illustrate, so in terms of personality, for example, basically if a person has no intention of either sticking with the law or living to high values or even sustaining a company beyond a couple of years, there is just no hope, right? I mean, they are going to do whatever it takes in order to achieve their short-term objectives, and they can be quite successful at it for that short measure. If they have the intention to actually be working towards good values or positive, stick within the law, work positively with people, if they literally don't know how to do these things, so if they don't have the personal skills and the behaviors that matches their intention, there's a mismatch, and their leadership will be severely curtailed, and it can't work either. And if they have the personal ability and they're able to motivate people, they're walking the talk, they are very authentic, but the systems, the structure of the organization are such that it consistently and persistently leads to a breakdown, it will not work either. You're swimming against the stream, and you have to change the structural elements as well. And along with that is also culture, and the culture is the one aspect that is hardest to touch. You cannot touch the culture directly. You can only approach it through the other 3 dimensions. And by working and transforming the other 3 dimensions in terms of people's intentions, their skills, capabilities, and the systems and processes, you can bring a degree of integrity in the organization that allows really exceptional things to happen. So how does this now fit within international and local trends, as it were? So in the area of governance, there have been a number of developments internationally and locally. So in Jamaica, Jamaica was the first country to have a code within the Caribbean and a national standard. And then Trinidad in 2013. And then very importantly, there were the OECD guidelines were revised after 10 years, both for state enterprises as well as the general principles in 2015. Since then, one of the trends that has been emerging is that the expectations by regulators, particularly following the financial crisis, has been to emphasize the role of the board in relation to culture. So you find that in the UK, in Malaysia, in South Africa, in many countries, the latest revisions of their standards on guidance that are being set has a lot to do with the culture, the role of the board and the governance systems in influencing culture. And one example of this is in South Africa, the King Code in the 4th edition in 2016, you see that one of the outcomes is an ethical culture, right? So it's not only performance, it is not only control and accountability and legitimacy of the organization, but the culture is seen as a critical element of that. Now, we benchmarked the systems in Trinidad and Tobago, looking at all regulations, all, so the State Performance Monitoring Manual, all latest editions of laws, and looked at the governance of the state sector against the benchmark of the newly issued guidelines for state-owned enterprises. And what we found is that overall, so these are here you see the principles of and the chapters within in the OECD guidelines, and overall you see that current laws and regulations meet about 45% of the benchmark in state enterprises. Now, state enterprises have a very important role to play, not least because they are the vehicle through which a lot of tenders are issued to many other enterprises, right? So they have a very large and disproportionate impact on the economy and on other enterprises. And so if the systems are not there, even if you have good intention, even if you were to have the culture, you swim against the stream, right? So basically one of the conclusions is, and recommendations is, we need to be working on those systems as well. But they, of course, they alone will not do it. We have to work on culture. But it's an interplay between the two. But there's a high correlation between regulation and if it's enforced with actual what people do. So we would say that based on our experience, the single biggest issue in Trinidad and Tobago as it relates to culture and shaping culture and changing culture has to do with accountability. So that's the one touch point. That's the one thing you cannot touch, is by all means necessary, stay unaccountable, right? And there are many creative ways of doing that. And so if there's one thing that should be tackled, I think it would be the degree of accountability. And the single biggest issue to be dealing with that has to do with disclosure and transparency, we would say. It would be the beginning. Without that, you can't deal with it. Now, within that context, if you look at the organization, some persons are saying that culture is maybe the only truly unique selling proposition for an organization, because it's the one thing that is hard and impossible maybe even to copy, right? So you can copy processes, you can copy other things, but not culture. Now, having a positive culture leads to motivated persons, no doubt, and motivated persons lead to performance. But the reverse is not necessarily true. So just performance alone, or I should also say that just having a culture, you lead to performance, but it is not the only thing. So you can also have performance without a positive culture, but it will not be sustained. So again, I mean, that is experience from enterprises. Now, one element that organizations are doing in relation to culture is basically having an ethics program. And an ethics program, and here we worked a few years ago with Transparency and with AmCham and with Chamber and with Jamaica and Barbados and the Inter-American Investment Corporation. And we developed a program here for the Caribbean, was the pilot place. And so one way in which you foster positive culture, not only prevent bad things, but also foster good things, is through an ethics program. And the ethics program has to have 3 legs to stand on. The first thing is there needs to be an actually written commitment, and a commitment to which people are willing to sign. So everybody has to kind of sign that. The second thing is there a follow-through system? Do you actually have people assigned to this, and it is not just somebody else's job? And finally, there needs to be an accountability system where actually implementation and follow-through is checked. So that is, and it's something that the board has to ensure exists in an organization. So the reasons for that are basically increased performance, access to other capitals, and so forth. Now, small and medium enterprises, which are the majority of our companies, it's unclear whether they have an advantage or a disadvantage. They have a disadvantage because they usually and often do not have the capacity to develop sophisticated systems or detailed kind of systems. But on the other hand, you would find that the actual motivations of persons is not only for the short term, and it's a lot about the long term, building a legacy and other reasons. So the evidence on small and medium enterprises is mixed. The kind of risks that organizations are exposed to has a lot to do with, not only in Trinidad, this is data from the US, but basically showing that it's a lot of trade-offs to be made between individual gain and company gain. And the best programs are those that are not focusing only on investigation and wrongdoing and whistleblowing, but it is to promote active discussion and resolution of issues, difficult situations, before they happen or as they happen. You want to be able to discuss it and clarify those. So there are many organizations, for example, that we have worked with where the political pressures of managers and others are dealing with a lot of money, and there are very strong stakeholders. And it's a political system, a governance system where the state is unregulated in its access to the organization. And there's political pressure coming into the organization, there's stakeholder pressure coming into the organization, and because the systems are not there, it goes on to the individual. And the individual can collapse or try to find a way of being, defense through confusion. And therefore, developing the systems is important. We would say that the easy thing to do is we would really recommend this IIC program that we developed. That was the original toolkit, and it's now made a MOOC. You can register for free online and go through all the steps that we developed then. The other thing that I would really also recommend is the Energy Chamber's Guide on Governance, because it's a very accessible, very practical, Trinidad and Tobago exactly specified governance guide, which includes the ethics dimensions. Not as full as the other, but it's completely compatible. And in working with companies in developing that, part of the reason that is guided at is that when companies that we, through the work with the Energy Chamber, inquired about what are their governance concerns, a lot of it has to do, or the number one topic, closely followed by the others, but is ethics and integrity. So that was a very important, and that is true across all kinds of structures. So whether you're a closely held company, you're a state enterprise, a traded company, ethics and integrity is a topic that is seen as an issue and a potential benefit that you can gain from it. So what do actual leading boards do? So yes, it's important. Now, how can you actually do this? And one thing that we do is when we work with organizations, we look at their minutes and we literally categorize all their decisions into different categories of work to see how do they distribute their work. And there is a great variety in that, but it seldomly looks the way we would recommend, right? So in order to really move the board, and usually what people are saying is we're too short-term focused, we're too narrow, approving too many things, we're not working strategically. And ethics and business ethics is a strategic issue because it gives you that advantage to work with persons to create an avenue for the whole organizations that is sustainable. So to do that, basically the work of a board, we would, if they meet very often, which is once a month, we would say that about 30% of their time should be spent on actually working with the executive on developing the strategy. And then they should spend about 15% of their time, which is about 2 meetings or so, on actually monitoring, tracking strategic execution. performance and capacity. So for example, on the ethics system, to say, do we actually have the persons? Do they actually do what they're doing? Show me the evidence. Make a report that is displaying how we are living and how we're monitoring, executing that. And then they should be looking outward and at the health of the organization. And culture is one of those elements that is included in that. And they should really be spending quite a bit of time on those areas, about 25%. In addition to that, they should be doing the formal stuff, which is housekeeping almost, reviewing the policies and monitoring those aspects. What we find in practice is that these monitoring and this housekeeping stuff is taking way too much time of board work. And therefore, part of it is you're missing the ethics, you're missing the actual essence of what you're trying to be working with and integrating that with strategy. To be effective, you need to have KPIs, systems to monitor, so you need a strategy cockpit, you need a scorecard, and you need a dashboard that looks at the health of the organization. And these elements should include business ethics dimensions, right? Doesn't have to be many, and I'll give you some practical questions as to what they can be looking for. Right, so for example, it is no surprise that basically the ethics, your approach to what values we have is not what looks pretty and what it is, but for us to be able to achieve the work that we are setting out to do, what must we believe and how must we act together in order for us to be able to do that? So the ethics are coming directly and should be directly linked with your strategy. And then you monitor what resources are we using, what activities are we having, and what outputs and what outcomes are there. And rather than second-guessing management of this, it is really working through policies and the management being able to report through the policies whether or not and how they are achieving this. So it could be done quite efficiently and effectively, saving your time to deal with the real high-value stuff. So some of the questions that the board should be asking and that you can check whether your board or other boards that you're working with, is just samples of questions, but basically, how are we, where do we exemplify our values? Are executives owning the responsibility or are they pushing it off to others, right? Show me examples of that. Are value and conduct statements taken seriously? So for example, we work with regulated organizations and you ask them, so do you have a business ethics thing? Yes, we have a policy. Can I have it? Sure. And then you get an old photocopy that you can hardly read, right? So the question is, when have you actually last looked at this? Has the board ever asked for, show me the evidence? Show me how many questions we have. Because I don't want investigations. That is useful. But I also want preventative questions. So it is simple monitoring questions that, again, need to be reflected in the minutes to see that you have actually done that work. Okay? And how are embedding values? How are our terms of reference for the committees and for the board? Are value questions embedded in that we monitor ourselves? And then where's the evidence? So unless you have the evidence, it really doesn't exist. Persistent championing, promoting, assessing values. Is our assessment, does it include values? Where's the consequence? So a lot of culture can be changed quite effectively if you actually execute on the hiring, firing, and reward practices, right? So to do that, if you look at it as a board as a whole, and it is looking inward, so you're working with the resources as inputs, and you look at your business model. So that is another aspect. So basically, a board, for example, cannot possibly govern risk if it doesn't understand its business model. How do we generate value? And part of that generation of value for the organization are also values and culture. So where does that fit in? Where are the risks that we're having? And integrated reporting provides a framework through which such reports and the work of the board and can be structured. And the unit trust is the first and only current example in the Caribbean, and we supported them in doing that. And that's it. So thank you.